All right. I've got a brief introduction to eastern forests for you before you get started on the activity for this week. You can see I've got it listed as eastern deciduous forests because that's kind of what we're focused on, but there's some areas with that are still dominated by evergreen gymnosperms. And so I think elsewhere, like in the activity, I've just labeled it as eastern U.S. forests. So you can just see a map here of the different forest cover types that we have in the eastern U.S. And here you've got listed 10 or 11 of the dominant forest cover types that occur in the eastern U.S. Unlike the western forest, where we kind of have these really discrete areas where we can kind of define different forests a little bit better, the eastern U.S. really transitions from boreal forest through deciduous down to evergreen coniferous again. And it's hard to put boundaries on those different regions. So instead of kind of looking at these really discrete areas, we'll kind of really look at the transition from one forest cover type to another as you go from northeastern United States to southeastern. And so in doing that, we'll focus on these forest cover types, which are the most common ones again. And in addition to focusing on the forest cover types, we'll also focus on the physiographic regions of the U.S. So before here, I'll show you, here's a picture of the physiographic regions in the eastern U.S. Well, this is for all of them, but we'll kind of focus on the eastern U.S. here. So you can see in the northeastern area, we've got the St. Lawrence River, or St. Lawrence Valley, New England Maritime, and the Adirondacks. And then we have several physiographic regions related to the Appalachians. We've got the Gulf Atlantic Coastal Plain, Interior Plains, and then the Ozarks, or the Ozark Plateau, and the Wichitas. So I'm already like doing this in a not very orderly fashion, but while we're talking about physiographic regions, I'll just jump down to kind of a definition of physiography or physical geography. So when we say physiographical region, it's the root word is physiography, which is just another word for physical geography. And so physical geography is really just a study of the land surface of Earth, as well as the processes that create that land surface. And so really what we're talking about are, what are the soils like? What's the parent material like? What's the topography? What's the climate? And vegetation can come into play a little bit in there as well. But if you remember, we talked about Hans Jenny's description of, or his kind of like prediction of what functions and what factors control the vegetation. And then I also said, like Hans Jenny before that had a kind of this generic equation for what controlled the soils. And so I'm just going to type that down here. So soils are a function of climate, topography, or relief, disturbance. What else do we have? Time and organisms present. And so physical geography in some ways is really tied closely to this, right? With it being like climate and topography, and then the soils being a large part of it. So taking those things into consideration, then, geographers and geologists have kind of mapped out and created these different physiographic regions of the world, and this map just shows you of the United States. And so we're going to kind of use that as our framework for looking at this variability in forest cover types as you move from the north to the south of the eastern U.S. and also from the east to the west. I shouldn't just focus on the north-south transition. So back to these physiographic regions, you can see a lot of them listed here, or you can see all of them listed here. I'm going to combine a few of them. So here's kind of the categories that we're going to talk about and think about in this section. So I'm going to combine St. Lawrence Valley and New England Maritime. Then we've got the Adirondacks, Appalachian Plateau, Blue Ridge, and newer Appalachians. Those are two physiographic regions that we'll combine together. The Piedmont Plateau, Gulf Atlantic Coastal Plain, Wichitas, Ozark Plateau, and the Interior Plains. So we'll be focusing on those 9 physiographic regions for this week. All right, so we've got these physiographic regions, we've got these forest cover types. And so that's kind of like the 2 pieces that we're going to focus on right now. Here are the 10 main forest cover types that we'll be looking at.
Okay, I'm freezing the frame here and recording some new audio because I deleted some stuff from previous semesters. So in just a second, I'm going to start talking about an activity, and that activity is actually assignment 12. So in assignment 12, what you're going to do is you're going to take data from the U.S. Forest Service from the eastern U.S. and quantify and identify where the most common forest cover types occur. And in general, those forest cover types and where they occur is going to align really well with the lectures, with like part 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 of the lectures, although there will be some differences. So do pay attention to the lecture and see kind of how it's different from what the data shows us. And there's some reasons I wanted to highlight some forest cover types that didn't show up in the data, and so that's why they aren't perfectly aligned. So anyway, that's the activity that I'm going to reference in just a second. So if you want, you could stop the video and go read that assignment description real quick so you knew a little more about it. But at the same time, I don't think you need to do that to kind of understand what I'm talking about in these slides.
And then the activity is just going to have you take data from the forest inventory and assessment network and actually estimate what the production is of these different forest cover types. All right. And so let me just show you that real quick, what that's going to look like. So let's do this real quick. I wasn't planning on this, but this would be a good use of our time, I think. All right, so if you're not familiar with it, the U.S. Forest Service, I don't know, a couple decades ago, I don't remember when it started, but they decided to start monitoring the forests a little bit better as far as what species are there, how many of each species, so that they could better estimate not only diversity, but production of these different forests and carbon storage and all of these different kind of attributes of different forest ecosystems. And so they created this Forest Inventory and Analysis National Program. You may have heard of it as just FIA data. And so these are plots that are located all over the US that they revisit every few years to re-measure all of the living and dead organic material and soil conditions and things like that. So it's a huge effort. Tons of money, tons of hours of work goes into collecting this data, but then this data is available to the general public. So this is data you can go and use as well. And so we're just going to use a small piece of this data. We're going to use the state summaries. So they take all this data and they'll provide some statistics for each state on what's the dominant forest cover type in each state and what is that productivity. And so that's what you're going to do as part of this assignment, is take some of that data from 10 different states. You're going to calculate the relative productivity of each forest cover type. And then you're going to really focus on those top 3. So we're taking a really large scale view of kind of the eastern US. And for each state, what are the 3 most common forest cover types that we'd expect to find in each of those states? And then you're going to need to link that state with a physiographic region. So for example, you've got Maine is one of the states that you're going to have to analyze the data from. And if we look on this map here and we go up to Maine, that's smack dab in the middle of the New England Maritime. And remember, we're combining New England Maritime with St. Lawrence Valley. So Maine is going to represent those 2 physiographic regions. All right. So hopefully in your minds, when you're thinking about the physiographic region of New England, Maritime, and St. Lawrence Valley, you think of the data coming from Maine. What are those 3 most common forest cover types? Okay, that's what it best represents those physiographic regions. All right, so that's the goal, is starting to get familiar with the physiographic regions and what forest cover types are present there. The other piece that I want you to start thinking about, and the activity will kind of get you thinking in this direction, is just thinking about how do the forest cover types change as you move, south and from east to west in the eastern United States, and then starting to think about, okay, so we'll just talk about spruce fir forests. We've already talked about spruce and fir with the boreal forest, and you're going to find that spruce and fir is one of the more common forest cover types in the New England area. Great. So what does that mean about the abiotic conditions that spruce and fir are best adapted to? Well, they can handle really cold temperatures and kind of low fertility soils. And so that's why we find them here. But as you move south, when it gets warmer and warmer, you're going to see that spruce fir forest kind of falls out, and we don't see it in the other physiographic regions. So I want you to start noticing those patterns so you can get familiar with how do these different forest cover types vary across the landscape in the eastern United States. So that's the goal of the activity that you're going to do, is to get you thinking about that. Then on Wednesday, I'll post another video and we'll kind of walk through how those different forest cover types actually do vary across the landscape. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the major management issues that managers are facing in the eastern US. All right. So I will record another video and post it for you on Wednesday, and there will be a short quiz associated with that. So I want to say we'll talk to you soon. I know we won't talk really, but I kind of feel like I'm talking to you. So see you later.